How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, November 29th, 2021. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile for Russell Wilson. The elite starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks turns 33 today, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to shine light and shine some emphasis on the accolades, the achievements, and the accomplishment of the player who was most recently named the Walter Payton Man of the Year. He was just named it for the 2020 year. And of course, to win the Walter Payton Man of the Year, which is the NFL's most prestigious award, you have to show amazing excellence on the field as well as off. Not to mention what he was able to do on the field. He was able to make a big difference in his community, especially with everything going on with the COVID pandemic. If you're unfamiliar with Russell Wilson as a quarterback, he's 5'11" and 215 pounds. Of course, his size was a big reason why he wasn't drafted so high. He is one of the prototypical small quarterbacks that many quarterbacks after him can look up to and thank him for giving them the chance, like Kyler Murray, to not have at least coaching staffs, GMs overlook small players. If those small players or those smaller quarterbacks can throw the ball and play like Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is one of your prototypical dual threat quarterbacks. Of course, he can throw any pass on the football field. He's one of the greatest long ball passers I've ever seen. And of course, he can run the ball for himself. Not to mention, he's an incredibly smart football player, so he knows when to do both. And he's just incredibly ready. He's one of the NFL's Iron Men. He shows up every single day, and whenever he's ready, the other team most definitely knows that they have a full game ahead of them. So I digress, getting back into the backstory of Russell Wilson. Originally born in Cincinnati, he would find himself playing high school football at Virginia. After his 4 years at Virginia, he would go on to, of course, establish himself as a great baseball player as well. After finishing as what many would consider a 2-star in Virginia, he would go on to get recruited to play his very first seasons at North Carolina State. He would eventually get redshirted during the 2007 season at North Carolina State. And of course, in that 2007 season, which was Tom O'Brien's first season at North Carolina State, the team would end up going 5-7. Taking a look at how the season would go when Russell Wilson first got there, which of course would go on to be his age 20 season in college. He will go on to play 11 games in the 2007 season for a North Carolina State team. They ended up going 6-7. They ended up making it to the PapaJohns.com Bowl, where they ended up losing by a touchdown to Rutgers. They would finish 6-6 on the regular season. In that season, as the freshman quarterback, he would go on to complete 54% of his passes as he threw for 1,955 yards. As a freshman, he threw for 17 touchdowns against 1 interception, which is incredible, which was an incredible ratio for any quarterback for any year to do so. Following that 2008 season, Russell Wilson would go on to be named the ACC Rookie of the Year, ACC Offensive Rookie of the Year. He was also named to the first team All-ACC following that amazing performance before they ended up losing to Rutgers after his freshman season. Following 2008, he would return to North Carolina State for his sophomore season, and in his sophomore season, he would go on to play 12 games in a season in which the North Carolina State Wolfpack would end up going 5-7. They ended up finishing the season, the Wolfpack ended up finishing the season 5-7. Russell Wilson would go on to complete 60% of his passes as he would throw for 3,027 yards. He would throw for 31 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. His 31 touchdowns would be the most that he would throw at North Carolina State. However, considering North Carolina State didn't get that far, he would not really get recognized like he would his freshman season. However, he would return for his junior season at North Carolina State and in his redshirt junior season in 2010, which of course would go down as his age 22 season, which was a season in which North Carolina State would finish with a 9-4 record after they beat West Virginia in the 2010 Champs Sports Bowl. They would finish as the 25th ranked team in the nation. That would be the first time they would finish the season ranked since 2002, the first time since Tom O'Brien was coach. In that season, Russell Wilson would complete 58% of his passes as he threw for 3,563 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. His 3,563 yards were the most yards he threw, and his 14 interceptions were also the most interceptions that he was able to throw in a season. He also added 9 touchdowns on the ground, so he would go on to finish with 37 total touchdowns, which is more than the 35 he had the year prior. At the conclusion of the 2010 season, Russell Wilson was named to the second-team All-ACC. And, of course, following his third season at North Carolina State, he announced that he would report to spring training with the Colorado Rockies organization. And because of that, North Carolina State said that he would not go back and play football there. He would go on to be released from his football scholarship. He would eventually go on to commit to Wisconsin for his redshirt senior season in 2011. And in his lone season with the Wisconsin Badgers in 2011, he would play 14 games in a season in which the Badgers would finish as a top 10 team in the nation in Brett Bielema's final year, his final full season there. They would go on to finish with an 11-3 record. They made it all the way to the Rose Bowl, where they ended up losing to Oregon. On the season itself, Russell Wilson would complete 72.8% of his passes, as he hadn't even completed 60% of his passes at North Carolina State. He would throw for 3,175 yards. On the ground, he would run for 338. That would combine for about 3,500 total yards of offense. He would throw for 33 touchdowns against 4 interceptions. That would be the most touchdowns that he would put together in a collegiate football season. Adding his 7 touchdowns on the ground, his 40 touchdowns combined are also the most touchdowns he was responsible for in a season. And of course, following his lone season with Wisconsin, he would go on to be named the Greasy Breeze Quarterback of the Year, which is given to the best quarterback in the Big Ten. He was named to the first team All Big Ten as well. And of course, following that season, he would be taken with the 75th overall pick in the 3rd round of the 2012 NFL Draft, where, of course, the first player picked was a quarterback, Andrew Luck, out of Stanford. And, of course, just to give you a little bit of background, but, of course, since the 2012 draft, he has been a member of the Seattle Seahawks, and now he is, at the moment, playing in his 10th consecutive season, which will finish a full decade with the team, giving a sense of what Russell Westbrook's 10 years looked like, starting from the very beginning with his rookie season, his age 24 season in 2012. He would go on to start all 16 of the games that he would play in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would go on to finish with an 11-5 record. They would win 4 more games in that season than they had won the year before. And this would be Pete Carroll's 3rd season fully coaching the team, just for context. In that season itself, and which would be in Russell Wilson's first season as a starter, he finished with an 11-5 record, like I just said. He would go on to, of course, throw the ball for 3,100 yards while he completed 64% of his passes. He would throw for 26 touchdowns alongside 10 interceptions. Not to mention that on the ground, he also ran for about 500 yards and 4 additional touchdowns of his own. That he would finish with 3,600 yards of offense and 30 touchdowns to go along with his 10 interceptions on the year. At the conclusion of the 2012 NFL season, Russell Wilson would go on to be named to the Pro Bowl for the first time in his NFL career. It's very rare for a player to be named to the Pro Bowl in their rookie season, but of course, Russell Wilson proved that he was that good as a rookie. At the conclusion of the 2012 season, once the Seahawks had qualified for the playoffs, they would end up beating the Redskins, and they were the Redskins at the time. They ended up winning that game by 10 before losing in the divisional round to the Atlanta Falcons. This is the season where the Falcons would end up losing to the 49ers, and the Niners ended up losing to the Ravens in the Harbaugh Bowl. And following Russell Wilson's first season, of course, he was already a Pro Bowler, but of course he had to prove that his rookie season wasn't a fluke. In his second season, his age 25 season in 2013, he would go on to start all 16 games for the second year in a row. And of course, spoiler alert, Russell Wilson has not missed a start even to date. He would go on, of course, to start all 16 games in a season where the Seattle Seahawks finished with a 13-3 record. They would win the NFC West for the first time in his time there, and he would be 2 for 2 in playoff appearances. And of course, they would finish, or like I said, they finished with 2 more wins than they had the previous season. Russell Wilson would go on to complete 63% of his passes as he threw for 3,357 yards. He would throw for 250 more yards than he did the prior season, and he would throw for 26 touchdowns, just as many as he did the year before. And he would also throw 9 interceptions, which is 1 less interception than the year before. He would run for 539 yards and only 1 touchdown on the ground, as he finished with 3,800 total yards of offense to go along with his 27 touchdowns, which wasn't as much as his rookie season. But at the end of the 2013 season, he would go on to be named to the Pro Bowl for the second time in his 2-year career at that point. And once the Seahawks made the playoffs, they would end up beating the Saints by 8 in the divisional rounds. They would end up beating the 49ers, who were the prior NFC champs, 23-17 in that matchup. They would end up going to Super Bowl 48, where they would end up beating Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos 43-8. And that was the season where I believe Peyton Manning set the single-season NFL record for touchdowns, just to get a sense for how amazing that team was offensively and defensively. To score 43 points on a Super Bowl team and to only allow 8 against the Super Bowl team is a very impressive feat. And following that 2013 season, Russell Wilson would be a 2-time Pro Bowler in his first 2 seasons and a Super Bowl champion, of course, on track to do some amazing things. And of course, Russell Wilson didn't just stop there. This would lead into his 3rd season with the Seattle Seahawks, his age 26 season in 2014. He would start all 16 of the games he played in a season where the Seahawks would finish with a 12-4 record, winning 1 less game in the regular season than the year prior. They would still go on to win the division as they made the playoffs for the 3rd year in a row in Russell Wilson's 3rd season. He would go on to complete 63% of his passes as he threw for 3,475 yards. At that point, that would be the most that he had thrown through his first 3 seasons. On the ground, he would finish with 849 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns, both career highs. He would not run for more in a season. That would be the first time he topped the 4,000 all-purpose yard mark, as he had 4,100 total yards of offense. And of course, alongside all that, he would have 20 touchdowns through the air alongside 7 interceptions. On the ground, like I said, in addition to his 6 touchdowns, that's 26 touchdowns on the entire season. And of course, at the end of the year, the Seahawks would make the playoffs, but in 2014, Russell Wilson would be named a Pro Bowler for the 4th consecutive year in his NFL career. And once the Seahawks made the playoffs, they would end up beating the Panthers in the divisional round by 2 touchdowns. They would end up beating the Packers, led by their go-to starting quarterback Aaron Rodgers, in overtime by a touchdown. And then they would end up losing in Super Bowl 49 to the New England Patriots 28-24. It was actually Russell Wilson who had the ball on the goal line that threw an interception to Malcolm Butler of the Patriots in like the fourth quarter with like a minute to go. That would end up losing the Seahawks the Super Bowl, at least when they could have handed the ball off, and the Patriots would end up taking a trophy. And Tom Brady now has 7 Super Bowls instead of 6 because of that play. But of course, Russell Wilson's still on this list, so of course his play, of course, makes up his play, except for that play, of course, is made up for it. But following that 2014 season, Russell Wilson was a 3-time Pro Bowler in 3 seasons who made the Super Bowl twice. Following his 3rd season in Seattle, he, of course, will come back for his 4th season, his age 27 season in 2015. He would start all 16 of the games yet again in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would go on to finish with a 10-6 record. They did not win the NFC West, but they still would go on to make the playoffs for the 4th year in a row, making Russell Wilson 4 for 4 at the time. In the 2015 season, Russell Wilson would go on to make the Pro Bowl for the 4th year in a row in his first 4 seasons, as he completed 68% of his passes. At that point, that would be a career high. He threw for 4,024 yards. That'll be the first time he threw for 4,024 yards. On the ground, he would go on to run for 553 yards. His 4,600 total yards of offense would be the most he would put together in a season at that point in his career. He would throw for 34 touchdowns alongside 8 interceptions on the ground. He would also go on to run for a touchdown, as he had 35 total touchdowns on the season for him. And once the season concluded, he would go on to be named to the Pro Bowl, as he was also the NFL's leader in passer rating for the only time in his NFL career. And once the Seahawks made the playoffs, they would end up beating the Vikings in the wild card before losing in the divisional round to the Panthers. In 2015 was the year where the Panthers went all the way to the Super Bowl, and they lost to the Denver Broncos, and that was the lone season, or that was Peyton Manning's 2nd Super Bowl, his lone Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 50. Following that season, this would lead into Russell Wilson's 5th season with the Seattle Seahawks organization. He would start all 16 games in a season where the Seahawks would finish with a 10-5 record, winning as many games as they had the previous year, and losing one less, as they, of course, turned that loss into a draw. They would go on to win the NFC West for the 3rd time since Russell Wilson had been there. He would be 5 for 5 in making the playoffs. And in that 2016 season, he would go on to complete 64.7% of his passes, as he would throw for 4,219 yards. At that point, that would be a career high in passing yards. And even to this date, he would not throw more passing yards than he had thrown in his age 28 season in 2016. On the ground, Russell Wilson would go on to run for 259 yards and an additional touchdown himself. And of course, following that, his 4,500 yards on the year, alongside that, he would throw for 21 touchdowns alongside 11 interceptions. This would be the first time since his rookie year he would throw a double-digit amount of interceptions. Not to mention that on the ground, he ran for an additional touchdown, giving him 22 total touchdowns on the year. He would go on to be sacked for the most amount of yards in the NFL as well. As the 2016 season concluded, this would be the only year between 2012 and 2020, all the complete seasons that he's played in which he was not named to a Pro Bowl roster. However, the Seahawks would make the playoffs, and once they made the playoffs, they beat the Lions by 20 in the wild card before losing to the Falcons in the divisional round in the year where the Falcons went to the Super Bowl, and then they lost tragically to Tom Brady and the Patriots as well. Following this season, this would lead into Russell Wilson's sixth season with the team in 2017. And in his age 29 season, he would start 16 games for the sixth year in a row, of course, in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would finish with a 9-7 record. This would be the least amount of wins that they had put together since he had been there, and this would be the only time that the Seahawks had missed the playoffs since Russell Wilson had been the starting quarterback. In the 9-7 season, he would go on to complete 61.3% of his passes. That would be a career low. He would throw for 3,983 yards, as he would also go on to run for, or I guess he would also happen to run for 586 total yards of offense. That would be, of course, 4,500 or almost 46 total 100 yards of offense on the season. He would throw for an NFL high 34 touchdowns. This would be the only time in his NFL career he would lead the NFL in touchdown passes. He would also throw 11 interceptions alongside it. His 11 interceptions would be tied for his career high at the time. And his 34 was also tied for his career high that he set for himself in 2015. Alongside his 34 touchdowns, he would also run for 3. So that's 37 total touchdowns on the season to go along with his 4,600 total yards of offense to give a sense of how productive Russell Wilson's season was. He would go on to be named a Pro Bowler for the 5th time in a 6-season span. He would, and that's how the regular season would end. And following that season, the lone season in which Russell Wilson did not make the playoffs, this, of course, would lead into his 7th season with the team in 2018. And in Russell Wilson's age 30 season, he would start all 16 games for the 7th year in a row in a season where the Seahawks would finish with a 10-6 record. They finished with the second best record in the entire NFC West. And, of course, within that season itself, Russell Wilson would complete 65.6% of his passes. This would be the second highest completion percentage he'd put together in a season, as he threw for 3,448 yards. He would also go on to run for 376. So he would go on to finish the season with 3,700 total yards of offense. And he would go on to set a career high for himself at the moment, as he threw for 35 touchdowns against 75 interceptions, which was tied for his career low at the time. He would also go on to, following the 2018 season, finish with his 6th Pro Bowl and his 7th season in the league. Just to give a sense of how amazing Russell Wilson was that year. And in the Seahawks' return back to the playoffs, they would end up losing in the very first matchup. They would lose 24-22 to Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys. This would transition into Russell Wilson's 8th season with the Seattle Seahawks in his age 31 season in 2019. He would start all 16 games yet again in a season where the Seahawks would finish with an 11-5 record, finishing with one more win than they had won the prior season. They would finish second in the West, as this would continue this would continue yet another season where Russell Wilson would be named to the Pro Bowl team. He was named for the 7th time in his first 8 years in the league. He would complete 66% of his passes, which at that point would form a new second highest completion percentage in his career. He would throw for 4,110 yards, the 3rd time in his 8-year career at that point. He had thrown for 4,000 yards. And he would throw for 31 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, the lowest interceptions he's ever put together in a season. He would also go on to run for 340 yards, and he would run for an additional 3 touchdowns. And, of course, with all of this, with his 34 touchdowns on the season, he would lead the Seattle Seahawks to the playoffs, where they would end up beating the Eagles 17-9 in the wild card round before losing in the divisional round to the Packers. And looking at how this ended, the Packers would lose to the 49ers, who would end up losing to the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 54. And then, of course, taking a look at Russell Wilson's last final season that he played with the Seahawks, in his age 32 32 season in 2020, which was impacted by COVID. He would go on to start all 16 games for the 9th year in a row. He would help the Seahawks finish with a 12-4 record as they won the NFC West for the first time since 2016. In that season, Wilson would complete 68.8% of his passes, which would be a career high. He would throw for 4,212 yards, which would be 7 yards shy of his career high. He would go on to run for 513 yards and 2 touchdowns. His 4,700 yards would be the most yards he put together in a season. Not to mention he threw for 40 touchdowns, a career high, the first time he'd ever eclipsed 36 even. I guess he threw for 30. This would be the second time he eclipsed 35. He would throw 13 interceptions, which would be a career high. And then, of course, with his 2 touchdowns on the ground, he finished with 42 touchdowns in total on the season. And once the Seahawks made the playoffs, they would end up losing in the wild card round to the Rams. But, of course, at the end of the season, Russell Wilson was named the Walter Payton Man of the Year. And, of course, considering the season is still yet to be finished, he is the most recent Walter Payton Man of the Year to date. And then, of course, this leads us into our 2021 season, where Russell Wilson has played a very pivotal role in making even though he's been out for a couple of games, he was here to make sure that the Seahawks have been running smoothly. Right now, they are playing with a 3-8 record. At the moment, Russell Wilson is completing 66% of his passes, as at the moment he's thrown for about 12 touchdowns on the season. And he's thrown for just over 1,500 yards, just to get a sense of what he's doing this year. But I can see that he's working Seattle right back to where they need to be. And considering that he is one of the few consistency standards in the playoffs, considering 8 out of 9 playoff trips was one of the most consistent runs I've heard of in this show. But of course, that just shows that Russell Wilson calling the plays is a very sure bet, especially if he's very sure and he's very confident with his team around him, and if he's very healthy. I can't wait to see what he does in the next few years. He's still playing as if he's at his best. He is getting better, and hopefully by this time next year I'll have more to say. But until then, I want to thank everyone for listening to all 26 minutes of this piece. I want to thank the college and pro Football Reference websites for giving me all the facts and figures, along with the Wikipedia articles that I needed for the other stats and numbers. I also want to, once again, thanks everyone for listening. I hope all is well. If you ever get a chance to watch Russell Wilson, I would. He wears number 3 for the Seattle Seahawks for the time being. Thanks once again. I hope all is well. And once this episode is done, once all of today's exhibitions are done as well, I will come back tomorrow on November 30th for another episode of The Elite. So until then, thanks for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with more tomorrow. Peace out.